When you go mow your lawn, do you just go mow your lawn? I don't. I time myself. And I try to do it shorter than the time before. See, if I can mow the grass in half an hour instead of an hour, that gives me another half an hour to do something more important, like watch television. Or pray, or whatever, you know.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
Well, today I'm carrying on in the series that began a few weeks ago called The Principles of Prosperity. And I told you this, that it was God's will for you to prosper. And we know that from a bunch of places, hundreds of verses on prosperity. And I love John's prayer where he says this. He says, I pray for you, brethren, that you would prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers. And what he's telling us is he wants us to prosper spirit, soul, and body in every way. Let me tell you what the scripture does not promise you. It does not promise that you're going to be filthy rich. That's not what prosperity is. Prosperity is actually you excelling and everything you set your hand to, God blesses. That's all prosperity is. So what we're going to do today is we are going to look at this thing called productivity, and we're going to look at the world's wealthiest and wisest man, and that was King Solomon. And Solomon has more to say about this than anybody else, and we're just going to look exclusively at things that Solomon wrote about this. And we're going to start in Ecclesiastes 10:10, and we're just going to look at this one little verse, and this is what it says. It says, if the axe is dull, and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength, but wisdom brings success. If the axe is dull, you use more strength. Let me ask you this. Any of you ever used a dull axe? Anybody ever had that wonderful pleasure? You know, when we grew up, we had an axe at the lake that no one ever sharpened. And everybody used it for everything. It was a sledgehammer. It was used to dig out roots. It was always in the dirt. I didn't know that an axe was supposed to be sharp on one end. Our axe was square on one end, round on the other. And even as kids, my dad used to let us use it because he knew at very worst we would bruise our foot, but we would never cut it off. I'm not joking. And you couldn't cut down a twig with this axe. It was so useless. You had to bludgeon the sapling to death with this thing. And you had to use more strength. And what Solomon's saying here, and I don't want you to miss the essence of it, what he is saying in other words is this, is that you don't want to work harder, you want to work smarter. That's exactly what he's saying here. And if we can understand that, we can know a lot about what it means to prosper and be productive in life. So let me ask you a couple of questions here. When we look at the disciples who were fishermen, I know this is a subjective question, I'm going to ask anyway. Were the disciples successful fishermen? It's a tough question to know, though, isn't it? Because every time we find them in the story, in the narrative, how many fish are they catching? None. They're not catching. So, you know, they may have been successful, prosperous. I don't know. It doesn't look like it. But here's the question I know you can answer. Were they hard workers? Yes, we know they were hard workers. And fishing is commercial fishing, very demanding profession. If those of you know anything about that, it's a lot of hard work. And we know these guys worked hard because when Jesus found them, they said this, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. We've toiled all night and caught nothing. So they clearly worked hard. And there they were on the beach cleaning their nets, mending their nets. They still had to do those things even though they had caught nothing. And I'll tell you, that's very discouraging when you work really hard at something and earn nothing. Let me ask you that question. How many of you had a time in your life where you worked really, really hard at something, put a lot of effort into it, and at the end you didn't make any money? How many of you have had that experience? Well, a lot of hands in the room. There's nothing fun about that. And so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how we can work smarter. And if we can work smarter, not harder, and become more productive, I promise you, you will become more prosperous in life. Some of you are going to think that this stuff is not very spiritual today that I'm going to talk about, but trust me, it is. And we're going to find every little bit of it in the scripture. And so what I'm going to do is going to give you the par 3. I'm calling them the par 3. I'm going to throw them up on the screen. because these three principles all start with the word par, and they are the Pareto Principle, Parkinson's Law, and the Partnership Principle. So let's start this first one. It's the Pareto Principle, and you actually know what this is. When I get to it, you'll all recognize this, and it was the man that invented it was a man by the name of Vilfredo Pareto. He was an Italian economist back in the 1800s, and in 1896 he came up with this concept he called the Pareto Principle, also known as the 80-20 rule. And here's how he came up with it. He recognized that in Italy in those days, 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the people. And he began to follow that, and he began to see that principle almost everywhere in life. He found it in his very garden. He went and actually counted the peas in his pea pods in his garden, and he discovered that 20% of the pods produced 80% of the peas. That was a guy that really wanted to find the truth. And then he began to look, and he began to see it everywhere in life, and he made this conclusion, that 80% of your productivity comes from 20% of your efforts, that 80% of your sales comes from 20% of your salesmen, that 80% of your profits come from 20% of your products, and just so you know the other side of this, 80% of your problems will come from 20% of the people, right? I mean, it's just the way it works. So here's my question. If the 80-20 or the Pareto Principle is true, we should be able to find it in Scripture. And it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that it's actually all the way through. I could give you dozens of examples of the 80-20 rule in Scripture, but I'm just going to give you the example of Jesus' ministry. Now, understand this before I get into it, that when we talk about the 80-20 rule, it's actually not exactly 80-20. 80-20 is the average. It could be 75-25, it could be 85-15, but you get the point. And on average, it's around 80-20. So we look at Jesus' life, we look at his ministry, and we know from Matthew 10, Luke 10, that he had 70 disciples. Do you remember that? He sent out the 70, 2 by 2. But how many disciples can you name? You can name only 12. Because there was 12 that he focused more directly on, right? And that was, you got it, approximately 20% of his 70 are the people that he focused on. And then out of his 12, there were how many that he spent even more time with? There was 3, Peter, John, and James. And so we see what Jesus did was he had 20% of the 70 and 20% of the 12. And what Jesus did was he actually didn't change the world with the 70. He changed the world with the 12. And he changed the world with the 3. Jesus used the Pareto Principle to change the world. And that's how important this is. And like I said, I could give you lots of different examples. And so what we need to do is look at this in your own life and say, if you're going to prosper in life, what you have to do is make the best of the 20%. There is 20% of what you do that really produces the results, and productive people focus on the 20%. Unproductive people, they ignore the 20%. They are not productive because they are not focusing on the 20% that really produces the results in life. And so we look at life and we see that there are things that we do that are more productive than others. Now, that is not to say that you are to ignore the 80%. There are 80% of things you do on your job and in your business and in your life that, guess what, you just got to get done. Like, you're not going to make any more money because you balance the books of your company. You're not going to make more profits because you're balancing the books. But if you don't balance the books, you're probably going to go broke, right? Because you're going to be in such a mess. And so understand that what we want to do is try to, we have to do everything, but what we need to do is remember what are the things that are really important. So now I'm going to circle back to what Mark Twain said. I put the quote up on the screen, but I'm going to give you the whole quote. This is what Mark Twain said. He said, if your job is to eat a frog, the best thing to do is eat it first thing in the morning. If your job is to eat 2 frogs, the best thing to do is eat the biggest frog first. I know none of this is appealing to you, but you get the illustration that what you have to do is do the biggest and most important thing first. That's all he's saying. It's interesting, Pareto, over 100 years ago, said almost the same thing, only catch this, he used Noah's Ark as the example in his book. And this is what he said. He said, if I was Noah and the ark was sinking, I wouldn't start throwing chickens and cats overboard. I would find the biggest elephant and throw it off. You get that, don't you? We understand this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the Pareto Principle. I'm going to give you the 3 things that will make this really effective in your life. And if you can focus on these, very, very simple, you can apply this principle to your life and start becoming more productive and therefore more prosperous. So here they are. They're number 1, clarity. Number 2, competence. And number 3 is concentration. So here's what you need to do. First of all, you have to figure out, what is the productive 20%? What are the things that I do that are really productive and really prosperous in my life? And it's really easy to do. All you have to do is zoom out the lens, look at your day, look at your week, look at your month, look at your year, or whatever it is, and go, what things produce the most fruit? What things did I give effort to? And every single one of you can figure this out. And you go, wow, that thing really wasted a lot of time, but this thing over here, that actually was the thing. So the first thing is you clarify. What is it? Have some clarity on what that 20% is, or that smaller percentage that is really productive. So that's the first. Second thing is competence. So the next thing you want to do is say, okay, if that's the thing that really produces in my life, what I should do is get really good at it. Because if I can get really good at it, then I can maximize it. But here's the mistake people make. So we do this self-analysis of our life, and we have different skills and competencies, and we go, well, I'm an 8 out of 10 at this, I'm a 5 out of 10 out of this, and I'm a 2 out of 10 at that. And we go, oh, boy, I'm not very good at this. I'm only a 2 out of 10. I need to work really hard and get better at this one thing. So I work really hard, and I increase my 2 out of 10 in this to a 3 out of 10. You know what? You still suck at that. You're still stinking it up. Why didn't you take the thing you were 8 out of 10 out of, and why didn't you move it from an 8 to a 9? You're following this, right? And see, you're focusing on the wrong thing. So what you have to do is whatever things you're good at, why don't you become really good at them? And I'm telling you, when you become really good at something, you know what? Somebody will pay you to do it. You know that's true, don't you? So the first thing is clarity. The second thing is competence. And the third thing is concentration. Now, here's the hard one. Here's where it requires some effort. So what you have to do is you have to say, okay, if that's the 20% in my week or my month or my year that really produces, then I need to really focus when I'm doing that. I need to put my best effort into that, and I better not neglect it. And the problem is, a lot of people, they don't put enough effort into the very thing that is the most important. They don't focus enough on it. So I'm going to give you a little autobiographical illustration here from my own life, my own week, to explain this. So you probably realize this, that I'm a pretty busy guy. I have a kind of a demanding job. We have this great big church. We have 5 different campuses. We have 7 weekend services. We have 60 people on staff. We have 250 leaders. We have over 1,000 volunteers. I speak at conferences abroad and at the other campuses. I am sitting on 2 or 3 different leadership teams here and there. I write books. I have a lot of things that I do in my life. I have a very, very, very busy schedule. But do you know what the one thing that I do that gets me the most results every week? You know what the number one thing I do is that gives me the 80% results? I'm doing it right now. The thing I'm doing right now, this preaching and speaking to the audience, where every weekend I speak to thousands of people live and tens of thousands, maybe in the closer to 100 or more thousand people every week, it's what I do right now. So I better do a good job. You say, well, it doesn't take you very long to do it. That's not 80%. It takes you, what do you work, an hour a week? So people always think pastors work an hour a week. Well, it doesn't take you very long. And that's true. The speaking does not take very long. The speaking, let me let you in on a little secret, is not very hard. It's not very hard to talk, right? We can all talk. The talking's the easy part. You know what the hard part is? Having something to say. That's the hard part, right? I mean, everybody can talk. You know, if I put a mic in your hand, you can go on. You know what my daughter once said to me? True story. She said, Pop, it's too bad your name wasn't Robert Loblaw. And I said, why would I want my name to be Robert Loblaw? And she said, then you'd be Pastor Bob Blah Blah. It was mean, but very funny. So here's the point. The time I spend getting ready to preach is actually my A time. That's my 20%. Not the actual speaking, There has to be something, you have to have something to say. So this is what my week looks like. So I'm in the office Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. On Thursday, I'm in my home office. I do not come in. And on Thursday morning, I wake up. You know what I do Thursday morning? I eat the frog. You got this, don't you? I mean, that's when I start preparing for Sunday morning, and there's this great sense of pressure. I'll be honest with you. Every Thursday morning I wake up and I went, oh no, it's Thursday. I mean, I have to eat the frog, and I have to eat the big frog first. And so I start eating the frog. And this is what I do on Thursday. I do not take meetings on Thursday. I do not do conference calls on Thursday. I don't go out for lunch with people on Thursday. I don't even respond to emails. I don't take phone calls. I have to do this. I have to focus on that 20%. I have to focus on that one day of the week. And if I don't focus on that one day, if I don't eat the frog Thursday, I will be eating frog on Friday. And if I don't eat the frog on Friday, I will be eating the frog on Saturday. Do you know Saturday morning, I was eating frog this week. That's how it worked. And, I have to, if I can get 10 hours in, if I can concentrate and focus for 10 hours on Thursday and get the bulk of it done, then I'm well on my way. If I can't get that 10 hours in on Thursday, then I'm eating frog Friday and Saturday, like I said. And so that's how it works. And so, these other things are important, but if we can focus on the things that are really important and do our best job on those things, I'm telling you, people will pay you to do what you do. I have people come up to me all the time. It kind of cracks me up. They say, oh, Pastor Mark, I really enjoy coming to your church. I really love the way you preach. I don't know why my pastor can't preach like you. And I say, I'll tell you why he doesn't preach like me, because he doesn't eat frog like I do. That's why. What? I don't need to explain everything, do I? Some of you know I play tennis, and I have this friend that I met. His name was Bob, same age as me. And I notice every time I go to play tennis, he's always at the tennis club. Every single time. He's always there. And one day I got in this conversation with him, and so I assumed he was retired, but I asked him this question. I said, are you still working? And he said, yeah, I'm still working. And then he says, I work 8 hours a week. I said, you work 8 hours a week, so you're semi-retired. He said, I didn't say that. And I said, what? He says, I am fully engaged in my business. What he does is he makes the valves for those suction machines when you go to the dentist and they stick the suction in your mouth when they're doing the dental work to suck out the saliva and goop. Those valves is what he makes. That's his business. And he says, I'm fully engaged in my business and I work 8 hours a week. And I said, so you're not semi-retired? He says, no, I'm not. He says, have you ever heard of the 80-20 rule? And I said, yeah, the Pareto Principle, I know it well. And he says, I looked at my life and I realized there was 20% of what I did that only I could do, and I hired somebody else to do the other 80%. And so, now not everybody has the luxury of doing that. I get that, right? But that's what he did. And so he's my age, and here he is. And, I wonder how he's doing with that. 8 hours a week, that's a pretty good gig if you can get it, right? And, he works hard during his 8 hours. The rest of the time, he's playing tennis. He picked me up the next day for tennis in his brand new 2019 Jaguar XE. And I thought, this guy's got a lot of money. And I realized he's got a lot more money than me. He plays a lot more tennis than me, but I can still beat him on the court, and that's what really matters in life. So the first thing is the Pareto Principle. The second thing is the Parkinsons Law. Now, the Parkinson's Law is not to be confused with Parkinson's disease, the neuromuscular autoimmune disease. Parkinson's Law was developed by a man by the name of Cecil Northcote Parkinson in 1958. And here's his book. He wrote this book. And what he did was he was imagining and wondering why bureaucracies are increasingly growing in size and increasingly becoming more inefficient. And he came up with what's called Parkinson's Law, and here's what it is. He says that any task will expand to fill the time available for completion. And let me explain how that works. He says if you give someone a project and you give them a month to do it, how long will it take? It will take a month. He says if you give the same task to a person and only give them a week, how long will it take? A week. People will expand what they do to fit the amount of time. Parkinson's Law is the enemy of the Pareto Principle, right? Because what happens is we waste our time and we don't realize that we should be focusing our time and using it more efficiently. Here's what Solomon said. I don't want you to miss out on what Solomon says about these things. Here's his verse here coming up right now. There it is. Proverbs 18:9. He who is slothful in his work is a brother to him who is a great destroyer, or some versions say a great waster. And what happens is if we take too much time to do something, then we're just literally wasting that time. So here's what happens in a lot of settings is we have too much time to do things. And if we would have a lesser time, we would focus greater on it. We would probably, possibly, and oftentimes do an actual better job. When you look at your life, I can promise you that all kinds of you are falling victim to the Parkinsons Law. And you have to get Parkinson to start working for you instead of against you. And you know how you do it? You start assigning smaller time limits to your tasks in life. And you go, instead of an hour, I'm giving myself half an hour. Now, you probably don't know this about me, the staff does. Do you know I time everything? I time everything. The whole service long, I'm looking at the clock. I'm sitting there, worship today was 19 minutes long. You say, how do you know that? Well, one thing, I wear a watch, and number two, I have a clock up there. And I watch that clock up there. And I know how long the announcements are. I know how long everything takes. And do you know, some of you know this because you sit near the front, that there's a countdown clock up there? Do you know that I'm looking at it right now? Do you know I know how many minutes I have left? I have 35 minutes on that countdown clock, and I'm going to have to start speeding up because I'm running out of time. And what I do is I just restrict the amount of time I give myself, and I do it in everything. So when you go mow your lawn, do you just go mow your lawn? I don't. I time myself, and I try to do it shorter than the time before. See, if I can mow the grass in half an hour instead of an hour, that gives me another half an hour to do something more important, like watch television. Or pray, or whatever, you know. So I think you're getting the picture here. So what we need to do is start, it drives Kathy crazy, because I say, I'm going to change the snow tire. She says, I'll see you in an hour. I said, no, you'll see me in 25 minutes. She says, you're not doing it in 25 minutes. It always takes you longer. I said, that is not my estimated time. That is my goal. I'm trying to get it done in 25 minutes. And so what we need to do to defeat Parkinson is to begin to crunch the amount of time. So the first thing is the Pareto Principle. The second thing is Parkinson's Law. And the last and the final thing is the partnership principle. Here's what Solomon says about this. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. He says, two are better than one because they have good reward for their labor. Do you know that really nobody succeeds in life alone? I don't believe anybody succeeds in life alone. I think the key to success in life is to partner with other people and to find people who are good at what we're not good at and work together with them and complement one another. And you look around the world and you look at almost everything that ever happened, and you will actually find partnerships. I mean, what would Steve Jobs have been without Steve Wozniak, or vice versa, right? What would Starsky have been without Hutch, right? What would Simon have been without Garfunkel, or vice versa? You know, I can never tell those guys apart. I don't know which one's Simon and which one's Garfunkel. All I know is that they made millions of dollars and couldn't afford a decent haircut. That's all I know. You look at the world, and that's what it's all about. I mean, what would Mickey Mouse be without Donald Duck? What would Buzz Lightyear be without Woody? The story goes on and on and on and on. We all need other people in our life. And the key to the partnership principle is this: find people to work with that are good at things you're not good at. And hopefully you're good at something they're not good at, right? And that's how you succeed in life. And I'm well aware that the success of this church has to do with the fact that I've managed, maybe by accident, to surround myself with very talented people that are good where I'm not. See, you can't be good at everything. Well, I sort of am, but most of you can't be. And you know, years ago, the first person I hired was Jeanette, and Jeanette was an administrator par excellence, maybe 10 times better at administration than I was, so I hired Jeanette. And then I hired Pastor Keith, and I hired Aubrey, and I hired, you know, Dwayne and Derek and Steve, and all these people that were good in areas that I wasn't. And so, who are you partnering with in life? But let me leave you with one final thought here, and that's this. There is a partner that you can have in your life who is good at everything. And you know who that partner is? His name is Jesus. And he wants to partner with you. And I'm telling you, if you can get Jesus as your partner in your finances, in your business, in your career, I can promise you you'll have good success. And I'll tell you the story. It's the story of the disciples. I told you already. Were they good fishermen or not? I'm not sure. But I'll tell you, when Jesus was their partner, they were good, right? And here's how the story went. So they had been fishing, and they were on the shore, and they were mending their nets. And Jesus was talking to a crowd of people like this. And the crowd had swelled, and they could no longer hear him. So he got into one of the boats, which belonged to Peter. And he got into the boat, and he said to Peter, push out from the shore a bit. And so he needed, don't miss this, he partnered with Peter. He needed Peter's boat. And so he got into Peter's boat, and he moved off from shore a little bit. And then he was using the water to amplify the sound like an amphitheater, and he spoke to this crowd. And so he utilized Peter's boat for this, and Peter was probably sitting there in the boat with them, I'm sure. And then he says to Peter, launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Peter says, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. That's where that comes from. Nevertheless, at your word, we will let down the nets. They had already worked hard. They had worked all night. And anyway, he went out into the deep. They let down the net in the middle of the day, and they caught the biggest catch of fish they have ever caught, so much so that they had to call the other boats, and it says the nets were breaking and the boats were sinking. See, what happened was they got Jesus into their boat. And you know what each and every one of us needs to do? We need to get Jesus into our boat, Jesus into our life, Jesus into our business, Jesus into our workplace. If you can partner with Jesus, I can promise you that you will succeed in life. So let me close with one final story here. So in 1903, there was a young man, Mennonite fellow, from southern Ontario by the name of James. And James had moved to the big city, and he decided he was going to get a horse and a cart, and he was going to have a street vendor cart. And he started off by selling cheese. And so he was going around, and after about a year and a half, he was completely broke. He was losing money. He was in debt. He was in such trouble. And he went to his horse, whose name was Patty, and he said, Patty, something needs to change. Patty didn't answer him because horses don't talk, except for Mr. Ed. Most of you are too young to know who that is. And so Patty didn't answer, but the next day he was talking to a friend of his, and he was telling his friend about his woes, and his friend said this. He said, James, you know what you did wrong? He said, you never made God your partner. You never brought God into your business. And he said, if you had made God your partner, I promise you that God will turn it around. So from that moment, he thought, I'm not actually making a profit, but I'm going to start tithing off my sales. Whatever I sell, I'm going to give to God. I'm going to give to God's work. I'm going to give 10%. And he began, even though he was in debt, and even though he was losing money, he began to tithe off of his sales, and his business almost immediately turned around. And he began to prosper, and began to pay off his bills. And then there was where he bought his cheese from was closing out. They were closing the factory. He ended up buying the factory. And then he ended up inventing this process to actually make what we call today processed cheese. And his company grew and grew and grew. And today it's the second largest food producer in the world. It's got 93,000 employees in 70 different countries. And last year they had sales of $34 billion. And probably by now everybody knows I'm talking about J.L. Kraft. And this is his original cart years and years and years ago. And his talking horse. And the point is that he understood that he needed to make Jesus his partner. That's the key. The Pareto Principle, the Parkinsons Law, and the partnership principle. We get Jesus into our boat, Jesus into our cart, Jesus into our life, Jesus into our business, Jesus into our workplace. And I'm telling you, John's prayer, that you will prosper and be in good health just as your soul prospers, that will be your promise and your destiny in Jesus' name.
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.